I'm Andrew Mazzone, President of the Henry George School of Social Science. Welcome to Smart Talk. On this program, we discuss and debate controversial topics with leading economists and social scientists. Our goal is to explore diverse opinions on the economic state of the world today. Today's guest joining us via Skype is Martin Ford. Mr. Ford is the founder of a Silicon Valley-based software development firm. He is a leading expert on the robot revolution, artificial intelligence, job automation, and the impact of today's accelerating technology on the economy. Martin, welcome to Smart Talk. Well, Martin, thanks for coming on the show. How we found you is unusual. There's a great social scientist on the left by the name of David Harvey. I don't know if you're familiar with David Harvey, but he's written about 18 books on social science, and they very seldom venture out into technology, but all of a sudden, in his last book, you appeared all over it. You obviously made an impact on him with your prognostications. And having read his last book, I saw you on there and said, oh my God, what's he doing, dealing with futurology and all of that? This is very unlike David Harvey. So then I read your book, Lights in the Tunnel, and I said, oh my God, this guy is essentially challenging the old Luddite fallacy. So. And in a very intelligent way. So that's kind of why we're here. Now, the Georgists are an old philosophy. Henry George started the foundation, or started the philosophy. We've kept the foundation going for 80 years. We're a backwater, in a way, economic philosophy, but the time is coming because we're against monopoly, essentially, and wherever it's found. And your viewpoints are apropos to that, because at the end of the day, if you're correct, very few people are going to be making everything, and everybody else is going to be on the outside looking in, trying to figure out how to get a piece of the action. So, with that as a starter, essentially you're maintaining, and we see the signs of it, that technology is going to onrush us in ways that we can't even imagine now, even though we've seen outstanding and astounding developments from the Industrial Revolution through the Silicon Revolution. But your thesis essentially says that the automation and the software and the developments that are occurring are almost now compounding and accelerating effect, and that we can't really anticipate what is upon us.
My initial interest in this began as I was working in my own business, in my software business, and I saw the impact that it was having. I mean, there was once a time where in software you would produce physical media. We would ship software on CDs, and there would be accompanied with that a physical manual and so forth. And all of that actually created a lot of jobs for average people to do all this routine type work. And of course, now that's pretty much disappeared, and now software is simply downloaded directly. So I could see the immediate impact that was happening in my own business. But broader than that, I mean, this is a fairly obvious trend, and it has to do with the exponential. And it has to do with the fact that we've now been on this for so long. I mean, everyone is familiar with Moore's Law, but most people don't maybe think about so much. Is Moore's Law has been happening for a long time now. It's been decades at a minimum. We've had at least perhaps 25 to 30 doublings in computer power. Now, if you were to get into your car and gradually double your speed, start driving at, say, 5 miles per hour, and then gradually double it to 10 to 20 to 40 like that. After doing that just a handful of times, you'd need a racetrack and probably a better car. But if you could double your speed 25 times or 30 times, you would be a spaceship. You would be traveling millions of miles per hour. And that's where we are today. So we're seeing just an extraordinary amount of absolute progress now because we've been on this exponential path for so long. And that's one of the things that really makes this different from what we've seen historically. The other thing is that information technology is truly a broad-based technology. It's everywhere. The people that are skeptical of this idea, and they think that really what we're going to see here is the same story we've always seen, will very often point to the mechanization of agriculture. They'll say, look what happened in agriculture. We had millions of people. Most people in the United States used to work on farms. Now the number is less than 2%, but of course we're better off. We didn't have massive unemployment as a result of that. But agriculture was a specialized technology. It was mechanical. It was specialized. It was machines, tractors, and machines pulled behind tractors. It wasn't technology that could be repurposed across the entire economy. But that is the case with today's information technology.
Let me interject. I'm a layman in your field. I mean, I've been involved with industrial automation, computers, touched upon artificial intelligence, and in my time, AI was not robust enough really to do too many things. It had a hint and a foreshadowing. But you're saying that today the software and the AI technology is now robust enough so they can really emulate and take over many human jobs that you couldn't even conceive of before, in addition to just the automation of instrumentation and so forth. Your comment.
Right. It's important to distinguish between the kind of artificial intelligence you see in science fiction movies, where you've got robots running around acting like people. In other words, replicating entire human beings in terms of what they can do, and the kind of practical artificial intelligence that we have in the real world. What we're seeing is a lot of progress on that practical side. A lot of times it's in areas that we would call, for example, machine learning, where you've got algorithms that essentially can look at data and learn from that. And in effect, what they can do is they can write their own program. So we've really moved beyond the stage where very often you'll hear people say computers can only do what they're programmed to do. That's really no longer true. Algorithms can now look at data, they can learn from experience, and they can get better and better. But they're still limited to doing very specific things.
Okay, so if we just take the acceleration of this artificial intelligence, eventually you postulate that routine jobs even can be replaced or modified or enhanced so strongly that labor starts to be shed from industries.
Right. I mean, primarily what we're focused on here are jobs that are more routine or predictable. In other words, the kind of job where you're doing things that are predictable based on what you've done in the past, so that an algorithm can perhaps look at data that reflects what's been done previously and learn how to do that job. We're not at this point talking about, thinking machines that can replace everyone, but still, if you think about people are doing out in the economy, a very large percentage of the people do relatively routine things. The potential to have an enormously important impact.
And if we have that along with outsourcing of traditional jobs in manufacturing, we lose jobs that way. In addition, we lose the any learning functions on manufacturing that would supply new functions for labor. So you've got a double whammy going here. And your book, in effect, implies the acceleration of the technology, in addition to this, is going to be enough to displace a significant amount of the workforce as you see it.
That's right.
What do we do? What are the options here? Essentially, if that happens, I would postulate, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the remaining jobs would be taken by people with more advanced degrees, more robust skill set. And basically, you're pushing into a narrower segment of the population. And most people would not have the skill sets to man these positions. And these positions would be so powerful in terms of output and productivity that there would be plenty of output. The question is, who's going to be able to buy it?
That's right. That's the general problem that we face here. Even at the high level, many people with college degrees and even graduate degrees are nonetheless doing relatively routine things. An example would be a radiologist, a doctor that reads medical images. That takes a tremendous amount of training. I mean, something like 14 years of training after high school to become a radiologist, and yet there's every reason to believe that eventually computers are going to completely take over that job. So it's not just about skill level and education level. It's really about whether or not the job is fundamentally routine and predictable on some level or not. So even some very skilled people are going to be impacted by this. So yeah, it's going to have a dramatic impact, and eventually the problem that I foresee is that we're going to run into a situation where we simply don't have enough people out there with incomes or purchasing power to really buy products being produced by the economies.
But that wealth would be piling up. It would be in someone's hands, and therefore you'd have relatively more and more product in fewer hands. Why couldn't I just tax away that output, for example, and in effect distribute it as
right.
some kind of a Super
Yeah, I
dope.
mean that's probably the solution, but of course that's a policy intervention. That's not something
Right,
that
right.
will happen naturally, through capitalism. But
No, and it's in fact it would be fought tooth and nail as undermining the very structure of the system. So, from your perspective in your business, how are you protecting yourself against this same trend? For you're in software, as you said, yeah, the systems are going to automate more and more. That presumably you have programs and so forth. You will need fewer and fewer of those with more robust learning systems and machines, super powerful chips. How do you stay employed?
well, I own a business, so that puts me in a little bit better position. I mean, it's going to be the people that own businesses or in effect own the machines that will for the time being be okay, and it's the people that fundamentally sell their labor, especially doing more routine things, that are going to be more in trouble. But in the longer run, the point is that everyone's going to be impacted, because even if you own a business, you ultimately you sell something. Everyone in our economy sells something, so there have to be people out there who are capable of buying what you're selling. So eventually, in the long run, we run into a really a systemic problem where everyone is impacted.
That's correct. So that and if we had to put a timeline where it really bit, along with the outsourcing, which continues, although that's slowing down, if you had to put your crystal ball thinking to work, at what point would you see a real crisis occurring in the West, let's say?
I think in terms of a 10 to 15 year time frame. But I mean, that's really nothing to guess. And I've talked to people working here in Silicon Valley, people that really are deeply involved in these technologies, and there are some that are much more aggressive than that. That think that within perhaps 5 years, we're going to see a really disruptive impact from these technologies. So it's really very, very difficult to predict that. But what I can say is that I think it's clearly coming. I mean, we're going to have to face it eventually. And even if it takes longer, even if it's more like, say, 20 years, 25 years, if you think in terms of the life of a child and their career over time, that really isn't that long. I mean, and especially isn't very long when you compare that with the amount of time it takes us to enact policies. For example, look at what we've done with healthcare in the United States. I mean, from the time that Franklin Roosevelt started talking about universal healthcare, it took about 80 years until the implementation of the Affordable Care Act. So, making policy changes on a large scale to adapt to these things is really a very non-trivial undertaking that probably is going to take a long time.
So much slower than the inflection point of technology. You're basically opining in your book that we reach the real takeoff and acceleration of chip technology or computer technology, the power behind artificial intelligence and so forth. And if that explodes and it permeates quickly within a matter of years, the firms that are doing this are in the forefront will be immediately spotted by investors or hedge fund men and managers and so forth. And the financialization of these firms will accelerate. And you'll have tremendous buying and booms on those areas and further consolidation and control. So that's going to, again, accelerate and compound the technology effects. That you're really going to have a situation where purchasing power is stripped from working people very quickly with no policy provisions able to intervene quickly enough to prevent a disaster. Would I be overstating that in your mind?
No, I think that's right. I mean, again, we don't know exactly the timing when it really becomes that extreme, but we see some evidence of this kind of trend already. I mean, you look at a company like Google, and Google has become just fantastically wealthy and influential, but it's done it with just a tiny number of workers. If you compare, for example, Google to General Motors in its heyday, Google got less than 5% of the number of workers that General Motors had at its peak employment, and yet after adjusting for inflation, it generates about 20% more earnings.
Some of the particular areas that you've observed that are really starting to compound and automate, that you yourself have experienced, some industries and so forth, that you could kind of describe for us that are changing very, very rapidly in ways that the lay public doesn't really appreciate. Maybe you could share some of the practical experiences of what you've seen.
Well, you can see it in a number of areas. In general, any kind of a white-collar job where you're sitting in front of a computer, manipulating information, doing relatively routine things, that's probably going to be vulnerable. And a lot of that is happening in big corporations, and it's not really very visible to the public. One area where you do see it is in law, for example. There are now e-discovery algorithms. And when you have a law case, you've got to go through all the evidence, all the paperwork, and you've got to find the things that are relevant to that case and present that to the other side. That's part of the rules of discovery. And it used to be you had lawyers and paralegals who would go through cardboard boxes full of paper documents and figure out which ones needed to be given to the other side. Now that's all done algorithmically.
Talking about automation, if we extended the idea to outsourcing, in a few years, labor will be a smaller and smaller component of outsourcing. And why would anyone bother to outsource? Or am I wrong in that supposition?
You know, if you're familiar, for example, with IBM Watson that went on Jeopardy, you can repurpose a technology like that to customer service and have, an automated system that has really got natural language capability. I mean, that's going to be disruptive in fields like that, I think. So eventually, yeah, less incentive to move those low-wage, predictable, routine jobs offshore. And in fact, we already see something of a reshoring phenomenon in some areas. What I think may happen is that those countries and companies that specialize in offshoring may be driven to sort of move up the value chain and go after more professional, higher skill jobs, because the opportunities at the low end are going to effectively evaporate as they get automated. So we may see more professionals and managers, people like that getting offshored. And there will be increasing technology in the future, artificial intelligence technology that can be used perhaps in conjunction with smart offshore workers that will make them more capable in terms of doing even higher level jobs.
Let's take a country like Germany that has made it its business to maintain and control its proprietary technology and increase it with automation and every technique known to make sure that they're at the highest stage of manufacturing development. Is it going to be possible for someone who's not in Germany with artificial intelligence to emulate these manufacturing advantages, for example, that Germany has, and in effect neutralize that carefully husbanded technology that's kind of embedded in their machinery and their software?
Well, I mean, that's obviously going to be a race, but yes, I think that if you look at what's happening in China, for example, they're getting better and better at essentially importing or replicating that technology. And one of the things you can say is that automation, the whole phenomena may happen faster in a country like China than it's happened in the developed world. And the reason is, of course, that we had to invent that technology in order to, automate our whereas a country like China really doesn't have to invent it at all. They simply need to import it. So I think that, countries like Germany may maintain they may maintain a head start there, but over time, certainly other countries will catch up, and it will become easier and easier as these digital technologies make the technology more available.
Let's assume we grant your premise that labor is going to be caught in a wicked vice in a relatively short period of time, and that the people who own the technology are going to be the big winners until they find out they have no markets. How do we intervene if you were the policy planner and you could be the policy planner for the world? What would be some of the steps based on your vantage point of trying to forestall a cataclysm which is shaping up, if nothing is done, to correct the purchasing power problem that I'll grant is going to occur?
In general, I favor some form of a guaranteed income. I mean, I think we're going to have to move in that direction ultimately. I don't think there's going to be any other choice. And that's obviously going to involve levying taxes on those people who are accumulating extraordinary amounts of income and wealth, and effectively redistributing it. The idea of a guaranteed income or a basic income is actually not, very often people will use the word socialism when they talk about that, but actually it's not a socialist idea at all. It's been advocated by a number of free market thinkers, and most notably like Friedrich Hayek was a big proponent of having a guaranteed minimum income. So was Milton Friedman. So really it's an idea of directly redistributing income, but in a way that maintains a market, so that you give people money and then they go out and they participate in the market, as opposed, for example, to having the government get directly involved in providing services to people, building housing or feeding people, or doing things that are much more intrusive in their lives. So it actually is really a market-oriented approach to it.
Let me intervene right there. We Georgists would look at it as, since we believe in getting rid of monopoly wherever it forms. The old monopoly, the obvious one, was land, where you control land, you control the natural resource, you could exact a rent, and in effect, you could reap where you didn't sow. Today, monopoly could be an aggregation of capital that's congealed with powerful automation. But whatever it is, if it's not a competitively derived earning, you could simply tax that and fund the government with that, and then pay a citizen's dividend with the residual, and then allow the citizens then to figure it out on their own. Your comments on something like that would be similar.
Right, that's a similar idea. Technological progress that we have is really kind of a public resource. It's something that ought to belong to everyone. And the reason is that if you look at these companies that have been created in recent times, you've got people that have become billionaires and built these incredibly influential technologies or companies, but they've done it because we are really so far along that exponential path of technology now. That's what enables it. It's really that accumulated progress.
And the first mover into it creates, in effect, a commons of users, which is, in effect, kind of a natural resource. Google has created a commons. Microsoft, with its operating system and the program, created a commons with which they were able to profit from. So those are areas that eventually are going to have to be considered as essentially a form of monopoly and probably taxed in the way that we've talked about.
We can view all our technology as a resource, not unlike oil in the ground or something, And of course, there are a number of petrostates, Alaska, for example, that have a sovereign wealth fund and pay essentially a guaranteed income or a dividend to its citizens. And I think we can adopt that line of thinking here.
Yeah, I don't think the problem is intractable if you think on those lines. I mean, it's inevitable that fewer and fewer people can make more and more things. Let me just switch tack a little bit. The drain on resources would not necessarily be lessened by the fact that we're super automated and we can create wealth with economical machines and relatively few people. But that doesn't lessen the draw economically the way I see it. How do you see that?
Yeah, I mean, the impact on resources is, I think that obviously there are opportunities there in terms of how you levy taxes in order to pay for this. I mean, one obvious way to help fund a citizen's dividend or a guaranteed income, I think, would be to levy a carbon tax, and therefore you'd be doing something very positive for the environment. So you do have an opportunity to impact environmental policy as well.
Because the question, of course, is how much time do we have both to solve the income problem and the resource and the environmental problem, given the fact that the technology is exponentially increasing and the social systems surrounding that move at a relatively slow pace. I mean, it seems like a cataclysm or a big bang crash has got to be the first thing that happens before we can actually get enough attention to sort it out. What do you think?
I think there is a strong relationship between these two issues. On the one hand, we need to take on these environmental challenges. On the other hand, we've got this unfolding trend going on, which is impacting people's income security, and those two things are directly related. As long as people perceive that they're not secure economically, they're worried about paying their rent next month, or they're worried about putting food on the table, they're not going to be able to focus on longer term environmental issues. And that's one of the big problems we see with climate change. If you look at surveys of the American people, they acknowledge that climate change is an issue, but it's also absolutely at the bottom of their list of priorities. And the top of their list, of course, is jobs, it's incomes. So I really think that if we want to have meaningful progress on environmental issues like climate change, we need to put this whole issue of income security and income inequality, front and at the top. I think that anyone who's primarily motivated by concern for the environment, they really should be thinking about income security for the working class and inequalities. These are the issues that they're going to have to fix first before we can really have the overall political motivation to take on these bigger environmental issues.
Martin, let's look at the current political situation today. We have gridlock. We have people talking about synthetic issues, basically nothing like we've just discussed. Not that we're the arbiters here, but no one's really discussing these problems in the debates between Democrats and Republicans. And furthermore, if I'm a New Yorker, you have to come to New York and say, this is party time. The life is good here. They're making a lot of money. The hedge fund guys are having a ball. The investment bankers are having a ball. Even if they blow themselves up, they get the government to fund them again.
Right, that's the problem. We've got very powerful elites who don't perceive the same threat to their own livelihoods and their own situations that average people are probably going to face from all of this, and yet they've accumulated all the power. And at the same time, we've just got this gridlock situation where no one is really willing to focus on it. And I think all the evidence suggests that the only way we're going to ever fund this is when we genuinely get to a crisis. And I think that's very unfortunate.
Well, I would end what I consider a great interview. We'll have to have you come back. Light in the Tunnel is the book. It's the great read. Apparently, it's captured social scientists of all stripes, because Martin has made a compelling case for the onrush of technology and has confronted the issues of income distribution and all of the things that are not really talked about today. So, Martin, thanks for the interview, and thanks for being so smart about these things.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
And that's it for this edition of Smart Talk. In upcoming shows, we will be talking with such renowned economists as Dr. Ravi Batra. Dr. Batra's work centers on the thesis that financial capitalism breeds excessive inequality and political corruption, which inevitably succumbs to financial crisis and economic depression. Please post your questions and comments on our website at www.henrygeorgeschool.org. I'm Andrew Mazzone. We will see you again next time.